Hey guys, how's it going? This is Mitch with the Sheriff's Office. I'm here today with Sheriff Tim Carter and John Jones with the Virginia Sheriff's Association, and we're going to be talking about some police reform issues, right, Sheriff?
That's it. Well, John, I guess I appreciate you being on with me this morning. The first question I had was, do you have any input on what local impacts you believe might be coming out of the most current Virginia legislative session and the previous special session?
Yeah, Tim, there's a lot going on. Let me just back up a little bit and tell you and the listeners, we've had three General Assembly sessions in about a year, and that's unprecedented. We had the regular 2020 session last year, ending about this time. Then we had the summer session, the special session, 2020, and it focused on criminal justice reform. And then we just had the regular session 2021. And I was looking at those three sessions. In total, there were 6,499 bills introduced. And that's just an incredible amount of legislation that got introduced and considered. And especially during the summer session, much of it focused on criminal justice reform coming out of, we were coming off of the George Floyd death out in Minnesota, and there were others. And a lot of folks they put in bills, they would read headlines and put in bills, and then we had to deal with all of that. And I would say there were some good things that happened, and there were some good things that happened because the bills were killed. And let me just touch on a couple of those. When you look at everything that happened in the last three sessions, the theme is accountability and for local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and there were almost every bill had something to do with accountability that meant anything. So one of the bills was qualified immunity, and we've seen the demonstrations, we've seen the protesters, we've seen what's happened around the country, and even in Virginia, and particularly in Richmond, where I'm at. You see the signs hanging out. We need to hold these police officers and law enforcement officers accountable, and that means abolish qualified immunity. And that was a message that got out in two of the last three sessions that could not have been further from the truth. It's qualified immunity. You have to qualify to get immunity, and what that means is that there were bills put in that would expose law enforcement officers to their personal assets. For example, if a deputy sheriff made an arrest based on a local ordinance, acting in good faith, and later on the local ordinance was declared unconstitutional, under some of the bills that were introduced, that deputy would have been subjected to personal liability. One of them had $25,000, one of them had no limit. So we prevailed on a close vote, really, in the House on one of those, and the Senate came through. And actually, that was one of the examples. We had a deputy in one of the counties that made an arrest on a local ordinance. Then it was stricken down by the court, and because of qualified immunity, the deputy should not have been held accountable. He was doing what he was trained to do. He was doing what he believed to be the right thing, and everybody believed to be the right thing until the court said, "Oh, wait a minute, that's not a constitutional bill." So the deputy shouldn't be held accountable, and especially have his personal assets on the table. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit because it's so important. And the other example I want to mention is relating to sheriffs and qualified immunity. If you can think back, we had a situation in 2013 where a candidate ran against an incumbent sheriff in a rural area in Virginia and campaigned. And he said, "Listen, folks, if you elect me, I'm going to train deputies better. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that." And he got elected. And there was a wrongful death lawsuit pending against the incumbent. Well, when the new sheriff came in office, he inherits that lawsuit. So now he finds himself defending a lawsuit that he kind of campaigned against and criticized. Now he's named as defendant because the sheriff inherits the old sheriff's lawsuit. That's the way it's always been. And when that was going on, there was $1 million coverage for sheriffs and deputies. And there was a judgment of $4 million. And so the plaintiff's attorney looked at the sheriff's home and everyone agreed, well, maybe we can go after that. And then the new sheriff calls me and goes, oh, my goodness, I had no idea my home could get on in block. And no one else did either. It hadn't happened. But back in 2000, I believe, 14, we went to the General Assembly and said, all right, look, we'll raise the limit to $1.5 million, but we take the deputy's home and his personal assets and the sheriff's home and personal assets off the table. The General Assembly passed that. Mm-hmm. So they were protected, and they are protected today. But that bill would have removed all of those protections. So, when people say we need to hold people accountable, I mean, it had a special meaning for our members because it would have meant putting your home on the block. So that was one of the issues that we spent a lot of time on and had to educate a lot of people. And fortunately, at the end of the day, the bill was killed twice. It was killed in the special session and again in the regular session just ended.
Right. John, a couple of things we've done here locally is we've placed emphasis in our budget request for an accreditation manager, a training officer, and a body camera IT manager. That's how we're trying to ensure this accountability. Talking about accreditation, do you think that it's important for county sheriffs to be accredited relative to all this police reform and what you're seeing coming out of the General Assembly?
For the first time ever, yes. I mean, yes, and for the first time ever, I've seen the General Assembly really begin to understand the value of accreditation. There were actually bills introduced that required accreditation, and then some of the bills passed that mentioned accreditation. And accreditation is an asset to the citizens of the county that's served by the law enforcement agency. And the reason it is because there's a review by an independent third body. If you become accredited in your agency, you're not going to be looking at whether or not you're meeting the standards and whether or not it's being done right. Someone from somewhere else is going to come in and take a look at it. And if you pass, you're going to get accredited. And if you don't pass, you're not going to get accredited. So for the first time, the General Assembly has recognized accreditation and has mentioned it in some of these bills. And actually, it was one of the issues that we supported. We think accreditation is great because it increases transparency and it increases accountability. So yes, I think that's the road of the future.
Right. I actually got a letter from the federal government this year, and they used our accreditation as certification regarding continuation of federal funding. I'm believing that funding is going to be tied to accreditation, state and federal.
I think that's very possible, especially with the new administration in Washington. Accreditation it ensures accountability. It makes sure you have a well-oiled machine. It makes sure that all of your policies are in place and that they're not sitting on the shelf collecting dust, and that when you adopt a policy and you decide what the policy is going to be on, for example, the use of force, that it's actually done correctly in the sheriff's office or the police department, as the case may be. So yeah, I think that's the way of the future.
Mm-hmm. John, as far as if we can move over to technology, I know there's been some issues with body cameras or field cameras, and requiring those to be purchased or fielded by law enforcement. We've done that here. We've done that more, quite frankly, more because of officer safety and that aspect of it. But now with police reform, you have transparency. And are you seeing anything, or I guess, what might your thoughts be on those kinds of things, that type of technology?
The use of body-worn cameras in law enforcement has gained a lot of interest in the General Assembly. And it started really about back in the 18 and 19 session. And then some bills passed in the 20 session that require, if you're going to have a body camera policy, and if you're going to have body cameras, you must have a policy that explains to everyone how the body camera will be used, how the information can be distributed under FOIA, and the policy has to be made available to the public. So again, it's all about transparency. And the General Assembly did pass that bill, and the idea is to move toward body cameras because it protects both sides. Somebody's watching everything going on, and body cameras serve law enforcement well. you and I both know there have been so many incidents in which people come in and complain about the way they were treated. And, everybody looks at the body camera and goes, well, it went pretty well. And it's a protection for law enforcement, but also it's a protection for the general public. There was money put in the budget, I believe, under a grant program with DCJF for body cameras. And also there was a bill that was introduced and passed. The patron was Delegate Levine from Alexandria, put the bill in to require the policy. We've had situations in the past where an agency would slap a body camera on an officer with no policy, and that doesn't work. So if you're going to have a body camera, you've got to have a policy. It's got to be available to the public. It's got to be made available for public comment before it's implemented.
Mm-hmm. How about training, John? We're part of a regional training academy, and the standards and criteria that we train to and meet with regard to new recruits, with regard to older deputies, all that's mandated by the Department of Criminal Justice Services. Do you think that there's going to be impact on training through police reform? I mean, I'm seeing that. Can you talk on that?
Yeah, training got a lot of attention, and when bills went in, there were specific bills on training on, for example, CIT, which is identification in mental health cases. And what the problem with that is that training is so important and it's so expensive. So when you train a deputy, the locality, the citizens and the taxpayers have an investment in that deputy sheriff. And the last thing you want to happen is that a deputy come in and get trained, he gets certified. That carries a lot of credibility. Once the officer, he's vetted, his background's checked out, and he's certified, and then he becomes marketable. And if the local sheriff doesn't pay enough money to keep him, he goes to somewhere else. And I know the state police, for example, has a lateral transfer program where they'll go to a sheriff's office or police department, and they'll like throw the net, and they'll collect these officers that have been certified, trained, so now they don't have to pay for that. And imagine the difficulty that it's creating for a local sheriff when the pay is not up there. So in order to have good training, you've got to have good pay. You need to enhance the pay so you're not losing your officers once they get trained. So it goes hand in hand. And specialized training is important, especially relating to, identification of mentally ill people that officers come in contact with, and that'll be dealt with in the future on the Marcus Alert program. And by the way, congratulations, you're one of the sheriff, maybe the only sheriff or one of two representatives of the Sheriff's Association on this much sought after commission to establish the policies relating to Marcus Alert, which is an alert program.
Right.
So, when you have a situation in the community, how do you respond to a mental health situation? How do you identify it as a mental health situation? And how do you make sure that it's done safely? And
right.
that's what's on the horizon with that. So, and that relates to training. Everything we do is driven by training, and the money needs to be improved for the training academies. I know there were bills put in that did not pass to provide additional funding for the training academies, and when that happens, that taxes the localities even more.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, I don't know if the average person understands some of how it all works. I mean, if the state is not going to fund the training academy request, then the locality then has to pay for that in the dues that are required by the training academy to the locality.
Exactly. I mean, and what happens is the state passes bills to mandate additional training, and they don't put their money there.
Right.
There were bills put in that enhanced training funding for the training academies, and they didn't pass. And so you're still stuck with the unfunded mandate, and the locality and the academy is going to have to do it. One thing that did pass for sheriffs, which is fortunately is a courtroom security bill that allows the locality, and it's voluntary. They can impose an additional fee to provide courtroom security, and probably some of that could be used for courtroom security training. But as far as training for law enforcement, there's a deficit there. I know these academies they're having a tough time, and they have to go to their local governing body and get their money, especially when it's not made available from the state.
Yeah, you see that in the state, John. You also see that in the local level, like the unfunded mandates. I know here locally, we had 2 resolutions passed. One was on supporting the Second Amendment, and one was on supporting Black lives. And in those resolutions, there are directives by the governing body that would pertain to funding that I use or funding that positions that I have and the training that my people get or should be getting. But there's no funding attached to it. I mean, in other words, there's a resolution. The community, expects a board to support one issue or another, but then on the back end, there's no meat on the bone, for lack of better words. There's no money there for those constitutional officers or those agencies to actually follow through on what's in the resolution. It's the same. I mean, it's at a local level, like you were talking about unfunded mandates on the state level. We're now seeing that at least we're seeing that here to some degree.
Well, and the reason we're seeing it is because it's a popular thing to do to require fixes for these perceived issues.
Right.
And somebody wants to fix it, so they say, "We'll pass a law, we'll pass an ordinance, and require someone to do something, but don't pay the money to do it." And a good example is I'm getting back to the salaries because, I've got a meeting here in a little while with sheriffs that are having to lower their age of deputies to 18 years old because no one will apply. And in some of the sheriff's offices, if they're surrounded by localities that supplement, you have a 35% turnover. Imagine a 35% turnover if you're trying to run an operation, and 1 in 3 deputies is leaving every year. And that's what we're dealing with. And it all goes hand in hand with the mandate. If you mandate more, don't give the money. It's just a burden for the agency to do what they need to do.
Right. Well, John, I know you're short on time, and we'll wrap it up. Is there anything else you wanted to cover while I had you on today?
Well, I think I appreciate I appreciate your input through the years. And last year, president of the Sheriff's Association that led us through the last year's session. And you had a legislative committee. The Sheriff's Association had a legislative committee, and we voted of those 6,000 bills. We sent out about 250 of them for the sheriffs to look at them and vote on them and tell me what they want to do with them. And we had a tremendous impact on many of those bills. And, for example, search warrants. There was a search warrant bill that passed, and we were able to go back to the General Assembly in this recent session to clean up the search warrant bill. And there's been a change in philosophy. We have to understand that elections matter. So we're dealing with search warrant bills. We're dealing with chokehold bills. And we were able to get language in many of those to accommodate public safety, officer safety issues that we needed to do. So the Sheriff's Association was on the front line doing that the whole time. This has been the longest legislative session we've had. We had a session last year of 60 days. We had a session during the summer for 84 days. And then we just had a session of 46 days. So we spent a lot of time in legislative session. And one of the problems was it was all virtual. You could not walk the halls of the General Assembly and say, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something," or whatever. You had to sign up virtually. They had difficulty, and many times you needed to say something. I did, representing the sheriffs, and couldn't get on. So you have to catch it when they went to another committee or catch it when they went to the floor and try to have input. So it's been a little bit more difficult with virtual, and we hope that'll change soon.
Right. Well, John, I appreciate you taking the time this morning. I appreciate what you do for the sheriffs and throughout the Commonwealth, and also appreciate the work that the Virginia Sheriff's Association. I mean, I don't think the average person understands that it's not about just running the office. I mean, you have to, it's all about good government, getting good bills, making sure that the people are properly trained, making sure your policies reflect the changes in the Commonwealth, the changes in the expectation in your community. And the Virginia Sheriff's Association does a tremendous job helping me with that and other sheriffs, and I do appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. I tell you, it's a teamwork effort. Everybody has a sheriff in Virginia. Every senator and every delegate has at least one sheriff, and some of them have many. A district in a rural area, a sheriff delegate may have 5 or 10 sheriffs in this district, and we have them all calling and making sure our message is getting delivered. And I think it paid big dividends this year.
Right. Well, again, John, thank you so much, and appreciate you taking your time to be with me today. Thank you.
Glad to be here and call anytime. Okay.
And that finishes up our first podcast on police reform. We had Sheriff Tim Carter and John Jones calling in from Richmond to talk about some of the issues that are surrounding law enforcement reform, laws that are dealing with sheriff's offices and police departments across Virginia. Thanks for being on the show today, Sheriff.
Thanks for having me.